If you ever lost someone before you learned what goodbye really means, then you'll understand this story. Because I was only 7 years old when my mother whispered her last words to me. Words I couldn't understand until decades later. My name is Michael Reed, and this is the story of a letter she never read. It was a cold November morning, the kind where the air feels heavy and everything moves slower. I remember sitting by her bedside, watching the soft rise and fall of her breathing. The smell of medicine filled the room, and the nurse kept whispering things I didn't want to hear. My mother smiled at me, a weak, tired smile, but it still made the world stop for a moment. She brushed my hair and said, "Michael, promise me you'll keep writing, no matter what happens." I didn't know what she meant. I was just a boy who liked to draw superheroes and write stories about dragons. I thought she'd get better. I thought there would be more tomorrows. But that night, she slipped away, quietly, like a candle flame fading out. I remember calling her name, over and over again, as if my voice could pull her back. But silence answered me. They said she left something behind, a letter. The nurse handed it to the head of the orphanage, because after her death, I was sent there to live. I never saw that letter again. Life inside the orphanage was different. The world there had its own rules. You learned to fight for attention, to eat fast, to grow up before you were ready. But every night, before I went to sleep, I would imagine my mother's handwriting, soft, careful, gentle, writing my name at the top of that letter. And I'd whisper, "One day, I'll find you." Years passed. The other kids got adopted. Families came and went, but not me. Maybe I was too quiet, too lost in the stories I kept writing in my old notebook. Stories about heroes, about hope, about people who never stopped believing that someone was waiting for them. When I turned 15, I found an old box in the orphanage library, dusty, filled with papers, and inside it, a few envelopes. For a moment, my heart stopped. I thought maybe her letter was there. But it wasn't. It was empty promises, lost words, letters that never reached anyone. That night, I sat by the window, the rain tapping against the glass. And I whispered again, "Mom, if you can hear me, I'll find your words one day. I promise." And I meant it. Because sometimes, when you lose someone, you don't just lose them once. You lose them every time you remember them. Every time you wake up wishing you could say one more thing. That promise, the one I made that night, became the only thing that kept me going. And years later, it would lead me back to the place where it all began. To a letter that waited 25 years for me to read it. By the time I turned 20, I had left the orphanage behind, but not the ghosts that lived inside it. The city felt bigger than I remembered, noisy, fast, heartless. But somewhere inside me, A small voice kept whispering, "You promised her, Michael. You promised." I rented a tiny room above an old bookstore. The walls were thin, the window cracked, and when it rained, the sound would echo through the ceiling like footsteps from another world. But it was mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt a little free. Every morning, I worked at the cafe downstairs, cleaning tables and serving coffee. Every night, I wrote stories. Stories no one read. I'd type until my fingers ached, until my eyes burned from the glow of the screen. And sometimes, when the world got too quiet, I'd hear her voice again, that soft whisper from my childhood. "Keep writing, Michael, no matter what happens." Those words became my heartbeat. I wrote about love I'd never felt, about goodbyes I'd never said, about people searching for something they'd already lost. I didn't realize it then, but every story I wrote was really about her, about a boy still waiting for his mother's letter. Years passed like pages turning too fast. I got older, but I still couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. Every time I mailed a manuscript to a publisher, I'd imagine my mother's name on the envelope, as if somehow she might receive it. And then, one evening, everything changed. The bookstore owner, an old man named Thomas, was cleaning the attic. He called me upstairs, his voice trembling with something I couldn't read. "Michael," he said, "I found something you might want to see." He handed me a small wooden box. The lid was cracked. The hinges rusted. Inside, wrapped in a piece of yellowed cloth, was a single envelope, faded, torn, but still sealed. There was a name on it. My name. Written in soft, looping handwriting I hadn't seen in 25 years. My hands began to shake. I could barely breathe. The world around me disappeared. The sound of traffic, the ticking clock, even Thomas's voice. All I could see was that letter. I wanted to open it right there, but something inside me said, "No, not yet." Because I wasn't ready. Not to know what she had written, not to face the truth of what I had been chasing all these years. So, I put it back in the box. I carried it home that night like a treasure, or maybe like a wound I wasn't ready to touch. And as I sat in my tiny apartment, watching the city lights flicker outside, I realized something. Sometimes we hold on to pain, not because we want to, but because it's the only thing that still connects us to the ones we've lost. That night, I placed the letter on my desk. I didn't open it, but I whispered to it, like I used to whisper to her, "I found you, Mom. I finally found you." And even though the letter stayed sealed, I swear, for a moment, I felt her there, in the quiet, in the warmth of the air, in the heartbeat I thought I had lost. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over, because some words, they wait for the right time to be heard. The letter sat on my desk for 3 more days. 3 days of silence. 3 nights of staring at the same envelope, wondering if I had the courage to open it. On the morning of the fourth day, I couldn't wait anymore. The sun was rising, and the light fell through the cracked window, soft and golden, like a memory coming back to life. My fingers trembled as I tore the seal. It felt like breaking open time itself. The paper inside was fragile, its edges yellowed with age, and yet the handwriting was still clear. The same gentle curves I used to trace in my dreams. "My dearest Michael," it began. "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it back to you." I froze. The air left my lungs. Her voice echoed in my head, as if she were reading the words herself. "I wanted you to know that I never abandoned you. They told me I was too sick, that you needed a better chance, that the orphanage would help you find a future I couldn't give you." Tears blurred the ink. I could barely see the words. "I used to visit the gate every Sunday," she wrote, "just to see your shadow in the window. You never noticed me, but I was always there." My heart broke and healed in the same breath. "I left this letter with Sister Margaret," the next line said. "She promised she'd give it to you when you were ready. If you're reading it now, then maybe you finally are." I pressed the paper against my chest, as if I could feel her heartbeat through the words. But there was more. In the drawer of my old desk, there's a small blue notebook. It's full of stories I wrote for you. Each one begins with the same line. "Once upon a time, there was a boy named Michael. I hoped that one day you'd finish them for me." The letter ended there. No goodbye. Just her name. Anna. Written like a whisper that refused to fade. I sat there for hours, staring at that final word. Because in that single name, I found everything I had been searching for: forgiveness, love, and the truth I never knew. She hadn't left me. She had been waiting for me to find her, in a story, in a letter, in the silence between words. I packed a small bag that night. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to find that blue notebook. The next morning, I boarded a bus to my hometown. The same route I had taken 25 years ago, the same road that had once taken me away from her. The town looked smaller now. The streets were cracked, the houses older, but every corner whispered her name. When I reached the orphanage, it was abandoned. The windows broken, the gates rusted shut. But somehow, I knew she was still there, in the walls, in the dust, in the air that smelled faintly of lilies, her favorite flower. I broke the lock and walked inside. The silence greeted me like an old friend. In the corner of the office, half buried under piles of old records, was a small wooden desk. I opened the drawer, and there it was. A blue notebook, faded, fragile, with my name written on the cover in silver ink. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Inside were stories, dozens of them, unfinished tales about courage, kindness, hope. And on the very last page, written in the softest handwriting, were the words, "Finish these stories, my son, and when you do, you'll know that I never left." I closed the notebook, tears streaming down my face. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "I'll finish them, Mom. I promise." Outside, the wind picked up. The pages rustled like laughter. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone anymore. Because sometimes, the people we lose never really leave us. They just live on in the stories we choose to tell. It took me weeks to gather the courage to open that blue notebook again. Every page smelled faintly of old paper and her perfume, like time had tried to hold on to her, refusing to let go. The stories inside were half finished. Some just a paragraph, others only a single line. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Michael. Every word felt like a piece of her heart, and I knew what I had to do. I began writing. Night after night, by the dim light of my desk lamp, I breathed life into her unfinished worlds. There were stories about kindness, about loss, about finding light in the dark. But each one, somehow, was really about us. A mother who loved too deeply, and a son who learned to forgive the world. Sometimes I'd stop and close my eyes, imagining her beside me. I'd whisper, "Does this sound right, Mom?" And in the quiet of the room, I swear I could almost hear her whisper back, "Yes, my son, keep going." Months passed. The notebook grew heavier, its pages now filled with both our words, hers and mine, past and present, stitched together like a heartbeat. When I finished the last story, I didn't cry. I just smiled, because I finally understood this was never about sadness. It was about love surviving time itself. I decided to publish the stories, not for fame, not for money, but because somewhere out there, maybe another lost child needed to know that pain can be turned into light. The book came out a year later. Its title was simple, "The Letters I Found." To my surprise, it spread faster than I ever imagined. Messages started pouring in, from people who had lost their parents, from orphans, from dreamers, from anyone who ever felt unseen. They all said the same thing: "Your mother's words healed me." And that's when I realized the promise I made to her, to finish the stories, wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who needed to believe again. One night during a book signing, a little girl walked up to me. She handed me a small note and said, "My mom told me to give you this. She said your stories helped her smile again." When I opened the note, it simply said, "Thank you for keeping your promise." I looked up, but the girl and her mother were already gone. Only the scent of lilies lingered in the air. That night, I walked home through the quiet streets, stars shining above like tiny pieces of heaven. And I finally whispered the words I had waited a lifetime to say. "I did it, Mom. I kept my promise." For the first time, the ache in my chest was gone. It had turned into something else, a warmth, a peace I had never known. Now, every morning, I sit by the same window where I once dreamed of her return. I write letters, not to her, but to the world. Letters of hope, of forgiveness, of light. And sometimes when I finish one, I place my hand over the blue notebook on my desk. It's worn, faded, but it still glows in the sunlight. And I swear, if you listen closely enough, You can still hear her voice inside the pages, whispering the words that began it all. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Michael. A boy who turned his pain into purpose. The boy who found his mother again, not in the world, but in the words she left behind. And in that moment, I knew the truth. The story was never just mine. It was ours. A promise kept, a love that never died, a light that would never fade.